Welcome to the Art of Wealth podcast, where we do wealth beautifully, meaningfully, and well. Welcome, Tim. I am so grateful to have you on the podcast. I have obviously been following your work for years, and I'm so excited for everyone to hear your story.
Well, thanks. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to this. I don't know what's going to come, but I'm all for it.
Let's do it. So last time we talked, you shared with me a pretty amazing story about kind of your philosophy on life right now and how you had a manager and then you decided not to have one. Can you recap that whole story for us and kind of walk us through what happened, what changed, and what life is like now?
That's a tall order. Let's see. I've been an artist ever since I was like 10 years old. I started welding sculptures when I was 10. And for me, it was just like, this is what I did. I rode my bicycle around the neighborhood. I jumped off the front porch and I made stuff out of welded steel. And I didn't really think about it as art per se until years later, after I'd been doing it a long time. And it wasn't, believe it or not, I went to Rocky Mountain College in Billings, Montana. And I took a triple major in art, drama, and music because I just love expression. And it wasn't until after I graduated that I finally realized, oh my God, I've got to try to make a living somehow. Because I'd just been so caught up in the whole business of the college life and learning stuff and doing all these different artistic things that I really hadn't thought too much about what I'm going to do next. And I just happened to get a commission for a big sculpture for a high school that took about a summer to create. And so that gave me time to think about what am I going to do? And by the time I was done with this sculpture at the end of the summer, I realized, man, I am married to this. It is just, I can't think of anything that was more delightful. But I've always been a terrible business person. And it just so happened that there's a friend of mine, a few years older than me, that saw my situation, saw that I'd spend a week making a sculpture and selling it for $25 to whoever wanted it, And he came to me and said, do you want a little help with this project? And I said, sure, anything you can do. And he walked from his office to his car in the parking lot. And before he reached his car, he had sold me a month's worth of commissions. And so he became my manager, and we worked together for 20 years. And during this period, I just got better known, and I got to do all these international projects, and I got to do a lot of peace awards for different organizations, like the Physicians for Social Responsibility. They gave a peace award every year for many years. Another one called Peace Links, which is a organization between the women of the US and the Soviet Union, trying to get these women to form relationships to be a kind of a bulwark against the Cold War, which is mostly a masculine project and is very, very, unsentimental. Mm-hmm. So that was another one. I ended up doing a Women's Peace Prize for the UN. And I got to be the first American artist ever to exhibit in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, the biggest art museum in the world. And that is an honor that I will never be able to comprehend. It is just so huge. here's a museum with a 375-year-old history, and I get to be the first American that they feature. It's just astonishing.
That's incredible.
So, but I feel like I've had these really wonderful experiences meeting incredible people. I got to work with Archbishop Tutu in South Africa before the transition into the democratic government. You know, when a lot of us were fighting against the apartheid system, the really racist apartheid system that they had. And, you know, I got to do a project with the Tiananmen Square students that were demonstrating for democracy. Um, just a number of these really astonishingly important projects. And here I am, this little skinny artist in Montana, living kind of at the edge of the world. I mean, it's not quite the edge of the world, but I swear you can see it from here.
Montana feels like it, absolutely.
Yeah. And the reason I live here is because I tried to live for a tiny little bit in New York, and it was just, the cacophony was so great I couldn't hear my own voice. And so I grew up in Montana, and I moved back here to just to be able to hear myself, and I love it. But I've always felt like I haven't fit into the American capitalist system very well. Mm-hmm. And particularly an artist. You know, I feel like an artist is a professional who is working in the area of relationships. When you encounter a work of art, essentially what you're doing is experiencing the soul of another person. And the material aspect of it is very minimal. And sometimes I think of it like, you know, my dog knows what a bronze sculpture is. It's just a hunk of metal that could put a hole through your car. But a person looks at the same thing, and all of a sudden something happens in their heart. And that's what the artistic experience is about. It's about a relationship. And in the capitalist system, everything is reduced to money. And so even that becomes reduced to, oh, what's it worth? What can I pay for it? You know, is it on sale? All these things have nothing to do with the relationship. So I've always really struggled with that. And I feel so lucky that I had a manager who could do all of the business stuff for me. So I didn't have to try to convince people to buy my work. And he did extremely well. He was very, very good at selling my stuff, and he really believed in it, which made a huge difference for me. I look at other artists and I just don't know how they do it. You know, how can you possibly spend your time trying to sell yourself, you know, applying for grants and exhibitions and trying to get your name out in front of the world. It just is, I think for an extrovert, it's probably a lot easier, but a lot of artists are introverts like me. And it's very hard to step outside of that and say, yeah, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, you know.
I think
so
all walks of life have a hard time saying that about themselves.
yeah. And the fact is, in a capitalist world, everybody has to play by these rules. You know, you first of all are a salesman. You have to sell yourself in whatever profession you are. You have to, for a lot of people, it's just essentially one audition. You know, you go to work for a company, and once you get the job, sometimes you can stay in it for decades, and you don't ever have to be a salesman again. But for any kind of an artist, like an actor, you get done with one gig and you're back out on the street again, pounding the pavement, trying to find another gig. And it's unfortunately very much like prostitution, I think. It's I feel like my spiritual gift is being turned into a commodity.
Mm.
And so it took me a long time to recognize that this is what it's like being a whore. And if that's the only option I have, which is true in a capitalist system, that's the only option I have, then I want to be the highest class whore I can possibly be. And so I started to be really demanding. And eventually, every time I got a commission, I would make it a little bit more stringent so that I could hang on to my own authenticity. Because a lot of times with a commission, somebody just wants me to do something about their vision.
Mm.
I want you to do a portrait of my dog, and I want it to look like this. It's just very uncreative. And so I finally worked myself into such a position that I was such a high class whore that nobody would hire me. But the fact is, I did okay. I made a lot of money doing art, which is very, very rare.
Mhm.
I couldn't have possibly done that without a manager. And early on, I learned um, that I don't need things to be happy. So I went to art school in London. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do that was to get a really intense kind of classical education. This is after I graduated from college. And it just so happens I was able to also work on a different part of my character, which is learning to live on nothing. And even though I had enough money to rescue myself in an emergency, I really did try to live on next to nothing. And so, for instance, I lived uh, in what in London was called a squat.
Mhm.
So there's this whole community of people that um, would take, they would find an abandoned building and move into it and live as squatters. And in Europe, this is a pretty reasonable answer to a terrible housing shortage.
Mm.
And so there's this whole subculture of squatters that even have certain civil rights that we don't have in this country. Um, so I lived in a place that was a squat, a real house that was just run down, and myself and three other guys lived in this house. And so I was living for free. I had a bicycle and I would bicycle to the art school. And on the way home, I came through this kind of big vegetable market. And at the end of the day, all the big trucks would drive away and there'd be extra vegetables lying in the street. And I would go and pick these things up and take them home and take off the bad stuff. And, that was how I survived.
Wow.
And I did things like dumpster diving, looking for furniture and um, just whatever was useful. And this became for me a pretty important part of my education, because what I realized was I want to be a kind of person that is very hard to kill. I don't want to live this really high class life where, if I don't get the right brand of soap, I'm going to be upset. I just wanted to be able to live almost like a scavenger in the contemporary society.
Oh, this is a terrible comparison, but what came to mind when you said that was a cockroach, because they love to live on the tiniest little dregs of society, and they're completely impossible to kill.
That's right. Well, that was really good training for me. I mean, um, it was really great for me to be able to realize that I don't need uh, new things all the time.
Mhm.
I don't need kind of a certain lifestyle. So I was never really subject to envy of the neighbors. And here, looking at my life, you wouldn't be able to tell very much that I'm living this pretty Spartan life, mostly because for many years I was married and had a family, and I couldn't subject them to the same kind of um, austerity that I would insist on for myself.
Hmm.
But for instance, you look at my car now, you can tell that that I'm not living sort of the high class life. I have a 30-year-old car that I bought used and gave it to one of my stepsons, and he crashed it and gave it back to me. And I fixed it and gave it to another stepson, and he crashed it and gave it back to me. And it's still running. I just it cost me about, I don't know, $50 a year or something.
So I'm hearing a lot about your decision to live that Spartan life. What what did it give you to do that?
Well, for one thing, it gets me out of the mainstream traffic. I look at contemporary life in the US, and what I see is a lot of mindless scrambling after money and status. And if I was trying to explain this to a Martian, I don't think I'd be successful. The Martian would be saying, well, wait a minute, you got a really new car, but you can't eat that. It doesn't go any faster than, your junker. Why are you so insistent on this? And what it comes down to is we're trying to impress other people.
Yes.
And I'm very lucky in that I had a really great upbringing. I grew up in a very loving family, so I was supported and loved all my life long. So I never had to prove to anybody else that, I'm some kind of a bigwig.
Mhm.
You think of our president right now, he's on the opposite end of the scale. He's the most powerful man in the world, and yet he's scared to death that he's not good enough.
Mm.
You know, that would be hell to me, to just be so worried that I'm not going to ever measure up, that essentially I'm condemning myself to live in hell forever. Fortunately, I was able to escape that kind of life. And I've never been subject to envy of other people. The fact is, I have this wonderful life that I can't imagine it being any better than it is, actually. And part of that is I get to make art. And I think there are a lot of people that would just love to be able to survive as artists instead of working for the man, instead of grinding away at a job year after year that doesn't feed your soul.
Yeah.
And what's the reason that we do that? Well, usually it's because we have some vision that in the future things are going to be more conducive to a relaxed life. Oh, after I retire, I'll be able to go fishing, or I'll be able to sit around and read good books, or I'll be able to go visit the people that are important to me. And I say, man, life is short. Get with it.
Okay. How long have you been living this Spartan life? When did you go to school in London?
uh, I was there in 1980 and 81,
Mhm.
and most of my artistic success happened in the 80s and 90s. So I made what I think of as a lot of money, but I also had a family, and I put my wife through college or through graduate school, and I put three boys through college, and I bought a couple of houses. So, there was a lot of money going out. But in the meantime, um, it was very important to me to live this kind of a Spartan life.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a vegetarian, and I would, I'd take my family to a restaurant, and I would always buy the minimum to get by. I'd get a salad rather than a steak dinner. And to me, that was just honoring my situation. I'm perfectly happy as long as I'm being fed. I don't need to have the most expensive thing. So that was always a part of my my trajectory, my personal desire. I also realized that that I needed a kind of motivation that was separate from the commercial world. So a successful artist in our culture is one who makes a lot of sales, who has a lot of exhibitions, and is able to, corner a certain kind of the market. And that was important for my manager. It was not important for me. But in the absence of that, what can I live for? And I discovered that I really wanted to live a more structured kind of a Spartan life. So for instance, I have a sister that lived in Alaska for many years, and she and I would get together for a week or two every winter in California. And I would go paint on the beach, and she would sit there and read to me while I was painting. It's just such a beautiful way to spend time with somebody you love.
Wow.
And I would often paint this monastery where these cloistered nuns lived. And here, these nuns are basically imprisoned in this building that's not 600 yards from one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And I'm thinking, God, how can that happen? How can they voluntarily imprison themselves in this building and not be out in the beautiful world? And what I realized was that's exactly what I'm looking for. There's a way in which I need to get away from the world to be able to speak in my own voice without the distraction of all of these other factors. The market is such a strong voice. It was very hard to, you make something, it sells for $10,000 and you think, oh my gosh, my manager's saying, oh, let's do one of those again. It's really hard to say, nope, I'm going to go back and just determine what it is that's going to come out next.
Right.
And so I started to think about what is it about this cloistered monastery that is so attractive to me? Mm-hmm. And I realized it's being insulated from the noise of the greater culture. So I created what I think of as my own religion, kind of. It's a artistic monastic order. And I very rarely talk about it because it's such a strange idea. But this might resonate with some people, that if I'm not following the values of the dominant culture, then what kind of values am I following?
Exactly.
So I took these vows in June of 1994 for poverty, chastity, and obedience, the three vows of the monastic orders. Mm-hmm. And poverty is pretty clear. I don't want to surround myself with anything that is not useful or beautiful. So all the other crap has to go. Chastity has to do with listening to my muse. So my muse is the inner character that directs my creative ideas. And for me, this is a feminine figure that feels like she is on the outside, but actually it's a part of my own soul that I cannot access consciously.
Sure.
So I don't know if you can see, there's a painting on this back wall, kind of an orange painting
This,
of this nebulous sort of feminine figure. That's the figure of my muse. And so my responsibility is to listen to the voice of the muse. And if anybody else calls up, if my manager calls up and says, "Oh, we've got this great project for you," or the market says, "We'll give you 10 times as much money if you just change this whole thing," I had to learn how to say, "Nope, I can't do that. That would be violating the chastity of my commitment to my muse." And then the third factor is obedience. And that's whenever the muse says, "Okay, you're not going to do bronze sculpture today. You're going to do something with the economy, or you're going to do some social engineering."
yeah.
Then rather than say, "Well, wait a minute, I didn't go to school for that. I don't know how to do that," I say, "Yes, ma'am." Let's get right on it. So that has really been the saving grace of my whole career and my life.
Hmm.
It's very much like the nun who commits herself to God, who spends her life in the monastery praying to God. I'm doing the same thing in the studio. Here I've got this big glorious studio, and for me it's my monastery, and I'm concentrating on making art, which to me is like prayer. And I'm so glad I have that avenue, because otherwise it would just feel like I'm a misfit. I should be committed to a mental institution or something.
Well, I would argue that the people who are blindly following consumer culture and who are trying to keep up with the Joneses and who are trying to buy a more expensive car that's basically the same, it just has a different emblem on it in order to feel better about themselves or their status in life, those are the ones who are not all there. We're not all healthy mentally in that way. And so I think your trueness to yourself and your art is exemplary.
Well, good. I'm glad you recognize that. To me, the uh, the important things in life are our relationships. And if your relationships are based on who you're impressing, that's a very different thing than if you're really responding with your heart.
Yeah.
I've got an older brother who's a Methodist minister. In fact, he's the sixth generation Methodist minister in our family. So a long, long history of this. But he's always been kind of a mentor to me. And when I was younger, I remember him saying to me one time, "You have to clean out your black book." And I said, "What in the world do you mean?" And he says, "Oh, you got all these friends that just suck you dry." And I thought, well, geez, I'm a Christian. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Is attend to other people? And he says, "Yeah, that's okay if you're doing mission work, if you're doing charity work. But when you're talking about your friends, you have to be selfish. Surround yourself with people who feed you. And as long as you have a community of people that feed you, your friends, your intimates, then you have the energy to take care of the whole world. But if you just surround yourself with people who are like bloodsuckers, pretty soon you're going to be an empty shell and you won't have any energy for anybody." And that made a ton of sense to me.
Yeah.
So I'm very selfish about my relationships.
I love that. And I wasn't sure where you were going with that. And I love where it came out. And in the introduction to this podcast, and I'm sure listeners will hear me talk about this story many, many times, is the parable of the long spoons. And you and I have talked about the
Of the
parable,
which?
the parable of the long spoons.
Oh, yeah.
And so that just it so beautifully illustrates that, if you're hanging out with people who refuse to use their spoon to feed others, if they're just hanging out trying to feed themselves and not getting it and complaining about it, you're in the wrong you're at the wrong banquet. You're at the wrong table. Go back and sit with the people who are feeding each other.
That's right. And you'll be forever starving if that's your attitude.
Absolutely.
And here's one of the places where I believe the coronavirus is a gift to us,
Mm-hmm.
because it makes us realize that we are dependent on each other. That it doesn't help if I just create this bubble around myself. If I want to be healthy, I want to make sure all the people around me are healthy. So if I take care of the community, that's the best chance I have of remaining healthy.
Absolutely. It was a beautiful illustration of that. It has been. So tell us about your current living situation. How do you currently interact with money? Are you still squatting? What's going on in your world?
Well, in the early 90s, I had many different studios. I had 5 different places around town that I did different parts of my work in. And I was looking for a new studio, and the realtors kept showing me these fancy metal buildings and industrial looking buildings. And I just couldn't imagine myself in that kind of a situation. And finally, this realtor showed me this old dilapidated building that was 100 years old at the time. And it was just perfect for what I needed. It was totally falling apart. I got it for $16,000,
Wow.
and it has 7,000 square feet of space. And actually, it was almost a wreck. I mean, it wasn't worth much more than that. But I saw the potential in it, and I spent a couple of years renovating it. And it's now this beautiful studio. And I've got a video tour of it that I'll send you the link, and maybe you can put that in the description.
Absolutely.
It's this beautiful 19th century building built as a home for wayward women by Catholic nuns. And when I first got in this building, it was full of ghosts. And I had to make peace with these ghosts. But that kind of volatile, intense feminine energy has always been in this building. And it's been one of the reasons why there's so much feminine energy in my work, I think. So I do all kinds of different kinds of art. I do not only welded sculpture, but I do bronze. I do painting, a lot of drawing, and then these other weird things that are hard to describe. But in this building, I was able to have different spaces dedicated to those different activities. Mm-hmm. So I can work on a welded sculpture in the morning in a big kind of a tool shed. And in the afternoon, I can work on a oil painting. And then in the evening, I can work on a film, on editing a film on the computer. Totally different. And I've got a building that incorporates all those things. So in that regard, I'm extremely lucky. This is one of the best studios I've ever seen anywhere. So I'm extremely lucky to have that kind of space to work in. But at the same time, I live this very austere life. And I'm living in the studio now. I have been for about 10 years. I just love it because I can get up in the middle of the night and work if I want to. But it's also, for instance, I kind of furnished the whole building with cast-offs, with free furniture from friends, or I pick something up at the dump or something. And um, and to me, what that does is it um, well, it does a number of things. One is it keeps my mind away from the the expense of living and makes me more concentrated on beauty. So oftentimes I'll find a beautiful antique chair or something that, the bottom is broken out of or something. I'll grab that, I'll take it home, I'll fix it, and I've got this beautiful antique piece of furniture that has a story, that has a soul. That I don't know what its life was like, but just like this building, it has a soul that lives on generation after generation, and I get to participate in that. So in doing the renovation on the building, there are parts of the original construction that I was able to preserve. I've got a marble sink with some fixtures on the sink that are from the 1890s.
Wow.
That, I don't know how much I would have had to pay to to order these things from an antiques dealer.
Mm-hmm.
But just keeping my eyes open and being aware of what's available in the world, I was able to pretty much furnish this whole building for very, very little. And now the things that I buy are basically food. And every so often I pay an insurance bill or I pay my taxes or something. But things are not, I don't feel I need to buy things.
Right.
If there are things that I need, there's plenty of it available just in the world that people want to get rid of.
Our landfills are a testament to that.
Yeah, right.
Tell us about some of your experiences with your Random Acts of Art project and some of the travel that you did with that.
I have a friend who is quite a bit younger than me. I met him in Toastmasters, where we're both trying to learn how to better our public speaking skills.
Sure.
And we're very different people, but he is a marvelous speaker. He's a professional, in fact. He travels around the world speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And one day we were working on something. I took him to lunch, and he was talking about how tired he gets of traveling. So he's flying off to Scandinavia and Bhutan, and I'm saying, how can you possibly get tired of traveling? The world is so interesting.
Right.
And he said, oh, the hotels and the airports all look the same. And I said, okay, I've got a proposal for you. Next time you take a trip, I'm going to give you a fistful of drawings. What I want you to do is give them away to strangers and come back and tell me what happened. And he said, oh, I'd never heard of anything like this. And he took a bunch of drawings and he flew off to Scandinavia. And he came back and he said, that absolutely transformed the way I travel. He said, I never want to travel again without a fistful of drawings. And for me, it was a wonderful opportunity because, I've got thousands and thousands of drawings. And yeah, sure, I could give them to galleries and sell them, but I would much rather make a personal connection with somebody.
Well, what happened? What changed for him when he started giving these away?
Well, what he's used to doing is plowing through the airport like this, trying to get to his gate. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's number B6. Where is it? Get out of my way. And all of a sudden, with these drawings, he's looking around saying, oh, who can I give a drawing to? And so, he had to step, he's an extrovert, so it should be a lot easier for him.
Sure.
But he had to step out of his normal comfort zone and talk to strangers and say, excuse me, I'm doing this project. Can I tell you about it? And, people say, well, sure, okay, I've got 5 minutes before my train comes. Tell me what you're doing. And he would just hand out these drawings to people. And people were so moved by this. you know, Here's an original drawing that somebody chose you out of the crowd to give you. And there's no expectation. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to say thank you. You can throw it away if you want. Here it is. It's for you. And as I say, it just absolutely transformed the way he traveled. So he started speaking about it. And he came back and said, people are really interested in this. We should do it. We should do a show about it. So we put together a TV show. And we ended up doing a TED Talk about it. And then we did a stage performance, kind of this comedy performance about reaching out to strangers. And he'd never done acting before. That's something that's part of my training. And so I kind of pushed him on stage, and we did this combination of storytelling and doing skits with each other and slideshows. And during the performance, we'd call people up on stage, and we would interact with them, and we'd give drawings to people. And this ended up being this huge project. It's turned into a book, and we have this book called Random Gifts of Art that we try mostly to give away. I mean, they are available on Amazon. You can buy one, but both of us, when we're banging around the world, we've got a bunch of these books, and we just hand them out to people. And the thing about the book is you're supposed to read it, add your name and address, and then give it away to somebody else. And the book itself becomes one of these things that has a bigger story than itself. So if you go to a used bookstore and you buy a book, it has one story. You maybe see the person's name in the front, or you see their notes or something.
Yeah.
In this book, you see everybody who's had it, and you can go to the website, randomgiftsofart.com, and every book has its own number. And you can look up the number and find out where the book has been. So it's like each book develops its own story. So we had one that he gave to somebody in Las Vegas. They flew to Germany and gave it to somebody else. They flew to Australia and gave it to somebody else, all within 3 weeks.
Wow.
So the book had been all around the world in 3 weeks.
Oh, that's incredible.
And then there's all these other stories. Garrett, my buddy, gave a book to a guitarist that he ran into in Finland. So he had heard this guy performing at a club. The next day he goes to the airport to fly home, and this guy is on his flight. And he goes over and he says, "Hey, I heard you last night. It was really great." He gave him a piece of art and one of these books. And the guy said to him, "Well, I happen to be the lead guitarist of Alice Cooper's group, and we're coming to Montana. So when we come to Montana in 6 months, I'll give you a free backstage pass." And sure enough, they came. Garrett got to go backstage. It was just such a wonderful event. It's all because of one free drawing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, we have a bunch of stories like that. All these really great connections made just because somebody gave something to somebody else.
Well, and you said, relationships are the most important thing. And I think that we don't recognize how incredibly valuable relationships are because, knock on wood, they haven't really commodified that yet. And so I just love your stories. And will you tell the one about the gentleman you met? I think you said it was in Great Falls one time.
Oh, the beggar.
Yes.
I always try to give money to people who are asking for it. Regardless of whether I think they might be trying to hoodwink me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think people are just begging for money to buy whiskey or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. Anybody who asks me for money, I give it to them.
I heard a good story about that one time recently, actually. Um, a father was with his children, and there was a beggar, and he went to give them money, and the daughter said something like, he I think he's trying to get something from you, or he doesn't really need it, or something. Like, she could identify that there was something there that didn't seem right. And the dad said, for me to see a need and not meet it, I can't do that, because it's my character to do this. And if it's his character to swindle, then that's on him. But I
No, right.
just stay in my character.
Right. Karma is going to give us what we deserve. And I want to be a generous person. I don't care what happens. If somebody has gone through the embarrassment of asking for money, they really deserve something, regardless of the situation. So I was in Missoula one time, and I saw this fairly young guy sitting on a street corner begging, and so I gave him $5 or $10, and I said, "Tell me your story." And he said he was a fighter pilot in the Iraq War. And he came back and felt like he just didn't fit into society anymore. He just couldn't make it work for himself. And I went away from this thinking, my gosh, how much has the US government spent on training this man for a very, very particular kind of skill? I don't know anybody who can fly a fighter plane, you know? And here's this guy sitting on a street corner. He has this incredible skill, and yet the society can't find any reason to make use of this guy. And I just don't know how that could be, that a technologically advanced culture like ours can be so blind when it comes to the resource that is a human being.
Mm.
So why is it that if um, if a case of tennis shoes washes ashore, we open the case and we say, wow, look, tennis shoes, everybody gets a pair. But when a human being comes across the border, the first thing we say is, you got to get out of here. I've got to protect myself from you because you're a threat to me. We don't say that to the tennis shoes. Why is it that we cannot see the value of a human being? Why is it that we don't, when the refugee comes to the border, we say, what is it that you do? We need teachers, we need technical people, we need people to pick fruit. We need all of these people in our community. What can you do for us? It's just bizarre to me that we see human beings as a threat.
Maybe not even what can you do for us, but what can I do for you? It sounds like you've had a hard time of it. Let me help you for a little while.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
So one of your economic art projects was the Blue Bill project. Will you share that with us to like summarize this?
Yeah. Um, I have always been interested in this idea that we, how does economics even work? And I ran across a book by Charles Eisenstein called Sacred Economics. And he talks a lot about these things. And reading through this book, I realized um, that money is a kind of collective dream, and that we all just operate unconsciously. We have an unconscious relationship with money. And if we truly wanted to change it, we could. We, the people, could change it. And I have a story that I should also give you a link to, where I had a garage sale, and this woman came up to me and bought a $5 chair and gave me a blue bill. And I said, well, what the heck is this? And she said, oh, that's blue money. It's just like regular money, except it can only be used for good purposes. And I thought it was really ridiculous, but I was so interested in her story that I took the money. And then I realized, my God, this could change the entire economy. And so I started making these bluebills. And what they are is just like regular money, except I dyed them blue.
So real American cash dyed blue.
And on the back is a couple of lines of script here. On the top, it says, dedicated to the value of a clean world.
Mm.
And on the bottom, it says, what is this? Visit bluebills.us. And that tells the story of where these things came from. And so I made a bunch of these. I got regular dollar bills, dyed them blue, put this stamp on it, and started giving them out to people. And I tell them, you can spend this, but only if you believe in a clean environment, a clean world. And if so, you can have this, but the next person you give it to has to believe the same thing. And everybody wants a clean world. Even the worst polluter can't do anything with a dirty world. They need to have clean world, a clean bunch of resources to destroy, right?
Right.
So there isn't anybody who turns down this money. If we had a choice between blue bills and regular green ones, I don't have a green one around here anywhere, just to show you the difference. But yeah, maybe I do. Hang on. Just so you can see the difference between the green money and the blue money. It's enough so that anybody looking at this will see that there's a difference.
Yeah, it's
So
great.
when I go to pay for something, I pull out this and I say, there you go. And the person says, well, what the hell is this? And I say, it's money dedicated to a clean world. It can only be used for clean purposes. So you know that this has never been used for a nefarious purpose. Now with the green bill, I could have gotten this bill by hiring or by selling a piece of art or by selling my daughter into slavery. It's the same money. But this one can only be used for good purposes. So you cannot abuse it. And in fact, I did an experiment. I went to a trade fair and I had 200 of these sitting out on a table. And I left for 10 minutes. And nobody knew that I had a camera in the corner, so I recorded this. And people would come in and they look at this table, it says free money. And here's a stack of 200 of these bills. And nobody took any of them.
Wow.
And so it's theft resistant for one. But if somebody did take it, they would have to prove to the next person that they are dedicated to a clean world. So if I stole this and I said, Crystal, I want you to take this bill, it's worth $1. And you say, well, how do I know that somebody is going to, that it has any value? How do I know that the next person is going to take it? Well, you have to convince them. If they believe in a clean world, they can use this money. If not, it's not worth anything. If they think it's a forgery, it's not worth anything. So I've given out 1,400 of these so far, in all denominations up to $100. And I've only had one person reject it. And even the banks around here are giving out blue bills.
Wow.
And I'm thinking if we actually had a real choice between green money and blue money, nobody would take the green money because you don't know what kind of crime this has been attached to. Whereas the blue money, you always know every single person that used it for a good purpose.
I love how you just decided to change the meaning of money because we've given money all the meaning that it has, or we've allowed people to influence our decision of what we want to make money mean. And it's just a form of energy. It's just an idea. And you're like, I'm going to change the idea. And I love that so much.
Well, back in the 18th century, or it was the early 19th century, money was backed by actual gold.
Right.
So up until the 30s, the 1930s, you could go into a bank and change your money for gold.
Yeah, it was Nixon that took us off the gold standard.
Yeah. Um, and so what is it that backs up the money? It's nothing. It's just the dream.
Right.
So why not change the dream from something in which anything goes? You know, if you sell a slave, I'll take your money, to insisting on an economy where you have to do good with the money. So if I own a forest, the easiest way for me to get a loan is to convince the bank that I'm going to tear down the forest and sell the lumber.
Right.
And they'll say, great, here's your money.
And build a housing project while you're at it.
Right. But if I say, I'm going to use it for a good purpose, the bank isn't interested in that unless they realize that everybody wants a clean environment. So if I go and get the same amount of money and I say I'm going to preserve the forest and turn it into an educational center for children, they still want their return, but they insist that I give them back blue bills rather than green ones. So we could actually change the entire economy if everybody insisted on using the money for good purposes.
Well, I love this because, I mean, in that utopian example that you just gave, I don't feel like it's too far off, but it is so disassociated from our current capitalist society that it does feel a little bit utopian. But um, is what's really the focus there is the people and the human beings and the relationships between them. And I think if banks and any of the systems had more of a focus on how is this going to impact the person I'm lending to, how is this going to impact our greater community, and I think there are a lot of systems that are popping up that do have these values at their core. So I don't want to say that doesn't exist, but we need a sea change, as they say, to really make this happen. A forest school is going to unimaginably impact all of those children's lives and their families as they grow up and their families. It would have a completely different effect on the generation that went through there and all the ones that followed than an industrial brick and mortar school where you're sitting down for 8 hours a day. And if we just stop to think about the kind of effect that these different options have and really move towards a place of we can do this. We can focus on what's truly important. We can focus on the relationships. There's enough to go around. You're not going to lose anything. You're not going to not be fed. You're not going to not be okay because you don't have the Bentley. You're going to be more fed focusing on the relationships than the rat race.
Yeah, it seems to me that one of the things that the blue money does is it brings back the focus of where wealth comes from. It only comes from two places. One is nature. So the sun shines on the earth, the plants grow, and it creates wealth. Mm-hmm. We can harvest the crops, turn the animals into work or meat. And I'm still thinking in kind of capitalist terms here. But the other thing is human creativity. Mm. Creativity is real wealth. So if we had a system where the only way you could get money was by proving that you were going to use one of those two resources, either the productivity of nature or the productivity of human beings, we wouldn't have an economy that destroys nature. So what we've been doing for the last 50,000 years is grinding nature into money.
Mm.
And capitalist system is based on that idea that we're just going to use money for our own purposes. And what we learned from the indigenous cultures is if you live within the sustainability of the environment, then it doesn't matter what you do, everything is within reason.
Right.
In the capitalist world, you can destroy the entire Amazon basin, and you'll be flooded with money from corporations and whatnot. Despite the fact that that's our lungs, that's what we need to stay alive. Whereas if we just had this simple change of attitude that money can only be used for good purposes, then there would be no incentive to destroy nature. There would be no incentive to use human beings as objects. We would always treat human beings like founts of creativity. And we would only use nature in the way that nurtures its own creation of wealth. Because our monetary system is not based on wealth, it's based on debt.
Right.
So if I loan you $100, what I'm going to ask back from you is not only the $100, but interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means you have to go and talk somebody else into deriving more than you got. And that person passes on that debt. So the debt just grows and grows and grows. And now I've heard the figure that there's more debt in the world today than 5 times the world's production. So it's an enormous Ponzi scheme. At some point, the whole thing is going to come crashing down. So we really need to face it. We really need to come up with a different system.
Well, and one of the things that you and I talked about when we talked a few weeks ago was the debt of imagination that humans have now. And I see this so much in what so much of what everybody's talking about with the overuse of social media and the smartphone addictions and all the other addictions, and we're just feeding our minds with these morphine buttons and not using them as those founts of creativity, like you're saying. And I think so many people have a longing to connect with that creative part of themselves, to connect with their imagination again. And so if you could give advice to anyone who is listening on how to reconnect with that, their inner artist, their inner muse, their imagination and creativity, what would you tell them?
I'm so glad you brought this up. This is so critical to our time. The great theologian Walter Brueggemann says, we're a society that is capable of implementing almost anything and imagining almost nothing. And we see this everywhere around in our society. Imagination is a resource that everybody has. You look at your kids, you can see how incredibly imaginative they are. Mm-hmm. And what our culture tends to do is to squash that imagination, to try to keep people from coloring outside the lines. So that as adults, we are finally truncated to this narrow space of what is acceptable. Mm-hmm. And yet, there are so many different ways of solving problems. I wish I had an easy answer for what people could do, but let me give you an example. Here, we live in this very politically contentious time when it seems like, the right and left live on totally different planets. And yet, we're seeing something happen uh, in Hong Kong, where no, not Hong Kong, in Taiwan, where several months ago there's a bunch of demonstrators who were pissed off, just like we've been in the last few months. They stormed the Parliament building, and once they got inside, they realized, oh, we can't just, you know, scream and shout anymore. We have to come up with solutions. And they used the internet and this program that I want to find out more about called Polis, which concentrates on the commonalities between differing sides. So
Mm.
instead of talking about what makes us different, oh, I hate your idea, you know, that will never work. Oh, you stupid people. Instead of concentrating on that, we concentrate on what we can agree on.
Mm-hmm.
And what these Taiwanese figured out was they already agreed on 90% of everything they wanted. They just wanted something a little bit different. And by working with this internet-based program, they could essentially create a solution that everybody could agree to. And this is possible with so many different contentious issues, like abortion, for instance, one of the most um, divisive subjects we can think about. It would be so helpful for all of us if the two sides could get together and say, let's decide how we can reduce the number of abortions to the greatest degree.
Mm-hmm.
Can we work on that together? Instead of saying, well, I just insist that we do it this way. I insist we do it this way. That takes a real imaginative leap. And we have to be able to say, we have a lot of creative ideas, but we haven't thought of them all yet. And there are still possibilities for things that we have not thought of that might be a better solution than what we're using now.
There requires a great deal of recognizing each other's humanity in that scenario. And what I've seen a lot of with the division between issues and parties is a dehumanizing of the other side.
Yeah, I think this is endemic to war. It's really hard to create a war with somebody unless you can dehumanize them.
Exactly.
And I told you the story last time of this amazing incident that happened in the First World War, where the Allied side and the German side been fighting each other for months and months. On Christmas Eve, one side started singing Christmas carols, and the other side's they're Christians on both sides, and the other side started singing Christmas carols. And they started singing together, and finally they crawled out of their trenches and started interacting with each other. And they played a soccer game, and they exchanged food and pictures of each other's families. And they really created a beautiful confluence of humanity that had nothing to do with politics. And of course, all of those soldiers were removed the next day because they were useless as soldiers. The political powers that be would say, we don't want human beings, we want machines that are killing machines.
And they wouldn't fight each other.
Yeah. And I think the best way to reach across this very contentious political divide is to find human beings we can talk to.
Yes.
Ask them, what is it that you hope for your kids? What is it that you need in your life?
Yes.
And I bet you we would all find the same things. We want our families to be safe. We want to be able to make a living. We want to live in a beautiful environment. You know, it's not like we've got the troglodytes and the AI terminators or something. We're all human beings. We're all on the same team.
For now, anyway. Yeah. Well, so that brings me to kind of my end questions. And don't put too much thought into these. Just give us your first off the cuff answers.
Okay.
So, what do you value?
I value relationships above anything else. And for me, my first relationship is with God. Or another way of saying that is my truest self, the inner part of my heart. And then I want to have a good relationship with my family, and then with my greater circle, and then, the community, and then the nation, and then the world. But those relationships are what give my life meaning. So I got to take a walk with a bird this morning. My niece has a pet pigeon,
Oh my
and
God.
she for the first time ever took it outside on a leash, and we got to take a walk with it. And I had this great relationship with this bird. And that's just one of the most beautiful things about being alive.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, I wouldn't have thought that would happen.
Right. Oh, I love it. So, this may be associated and may not. Answer however you will. What's the most valuable thing in your life?
The most valuable thing is artwork. So I have a painting back here. Maybe you can see. Um, it's by, let's see,
It's all right.
we got a,
Maybe you
it's
can.
off of this shoulder. Um,
Why don't you send me a snapshot of it and we'll put it up in the.
oh, okay. There's an old Dutch master from, I think, this 17th century that I bought when I was in college. That I don't know if it's worth anything, but I've had it for many, many years. It speaks to me. It um, I feel like I have this beautiful connection with something that is much, much older than me, hundreds of years old, that somebody took the care to create. I have many pieces of art like that, some that are done by famous artists. I have one little piece of stone that was carved by another homeless man that I gave a ride to. And he gave me this beautiful little stone that he carved. And it's one of the most precious objects I own because of the story.
Mhm.
It's not the monetary value, it's the story that makes a difference.
And that is exactly what I'm all about here with this podcast because I'm to understand that it's not it's what you can do with what you have. It's the stories and the connections. I love it. Next question. How do you use what you have to support your values? Which in a sense you've been answering this entire time. But
I'm always trying to keep my ear to the rail of the collective. So I think we have this wonderful opportunity right now that is almost lost in the great cacophony of all of the tension, with COVID and the fires in the West and the demise of democracy and this incredible political tension and the disappearance of the middle class. All of this stuff is like, oh, I can hardly stand it. But it's also an opportunity for a new kind of thinking. And this is where all of us need to be imaginative. So one of the things I'm spending my time on is thinking about different ways of living from this point forward. Like, how would we do travel differently, knowing that fossil fuels are wrecking the environment?
mhm.
How can we look at hotels in a different way instead of like pretending to be wealthy for an afternoon or a day? It's a connection. It's an opportunity to connect with people from all over who
Mhm.
happen to be in this one spot. All the different ways that we can look at the problems of life in a new way.
Which reminds me of youth hostels where, the accommodations are so sparse that you have to interact with everybody who's around you. You're not in your own little private cubicle in a Hyatt. You're in a bunk right next to someone else, and you meet and you talk and you interact, and I would argue that in so many ways that's a richer experience.
Right, exactly. If you look back on your life, it's not it's not the expensive car that is going to make a difference to you. It's the relationships you've had, and
Exactly.
especially those strange connections that happen when you're in the elevator that gets stuck, and the relationship you develop with the other person,
Yeah.
or running into somebody on the street.
So, what does wealth mean to you?
Wealth means being able to do the thing that makes you happy.
Mm.
A lot of us think about that as being able to buy that. For me, it's being able to be in control of my own time. So I live way under the poverty line, but I'm also it's possible for me to go anywhere in the world I want to. I can I can suddenly decide I want to spend a month painting in California. Um, I try to do the things that are most beautiful that I can think of. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to say, what is it that's the most beautiful thing I can think of? And maybe it's helping my friend clean a house out in the mountains. Maybe it's doing volunteer work for the food bank. Maybe it's painting. Maybe it's taking the day and spending some time out in the woods. This evening, I'm going to install a sculpture in a nature preserve just outside of town here, with about 6 or 8 good friends. Just having a party, installing a sculpture. Doing a beautiful thing for the world.
I love it. So, what does it mean to you to have lived a good life?
For one thing, it's having a wealth of experiences, a lot of different kinds of experiences. So I've had some terrible tragedy in my life. And although I don't wish that on anybody, everybody needs that kind of a thing. So right now we're waiting for the death of my brother-in-law who's dying from ALS. And it's a terrible thing. I don't want to wish that on anybody, but I will not have wanted to live my life without experiencing that death, because it's part of what makes my life richer. Having known this person, having gone through the whole of his dying process with him, and being there at the end. My sister had cancer and it should have killed her. I don't know why it didn't kill her. But today she's healthy, and I went through that whole experience with her. And I wouldn't trade that for anything, even though I don't want it on my worst enemy. But I've had such a rich life. I've gotten to travel. I've gotten to meet all these wonderful people. I've gotten to talk to people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Having wealth is having all these stories, all these very, very different stories. I'm so lucky in that regard.
Wealthy. Yeah.
Yep.
What's one thing you wish everyone in the world believed?
I wish everybody in the world believed that all people are on the same team.
Mm.
That even though we have different colored shirts that maybe have different mascots on them, we are all on the same team. And there's not two different kinds of people, the chosen and the unchosen. There's not the good and the bad people. We are all of us on the same team.
Well said. Now you've got me crying.
Oh, good. Well,
Oh, well,
I
thank
have to say, Crystal, you're one of the treasures that I really hold dear to me. even though we haven't had that much interaction. I've known you for a lot of years, and you just have a special place in my heart.
Thank you. Likewise. Oh, thank you, Tim. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. And best of luck to you and your sister with what's going on with your brother-in-law. I know that's been really, really hard, and
Yeah,
I'm thinking about you.
thank you. Blessings.
I believe that the quality of the questions we ask ourselves creates the quality of our lives. At the end of each episode, I want to leave you with questions that are intended to increase the richness and fullness of your life. Here are this week's questions inspired by this interview. What are the most important relationships in your life, and how can you nurture them? What is in your life that is useful and beautiful? If you wrote your own vows for your life, what would they be? Thank you for joining me this week for this interview with Tim Holmes. You can view the show notes and sign up for the newsletter at artofwealth.co/2, the number 2, and also download these empowering questions. Thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next week.